I was working as a Taskrabbit plumber on weekends to pay for our wedding. When I arrived at a job, a man opened the door and smiled. My fiancée walked past him in a towel. We locked eyes. Then she ran and locked herself in the bathroom. As I rushed after her, he said, "What the hell? Do you know my girlfriend?" That's when I took Taskrabbit jobs on weekends because numbers do not lie. Rent, groceries, deposits, dress fittings, a venue deposit that kept inching higher every time someone said the word seasonal. I worked full-time during the week and fixed pipes on Saturdays and Sundays because I could still stand upright after 10 hours, and because Serena believed momentum mattered more than rest. She said a wedding should feel earned. I believed her, even when my hands cracked from solvent and winter air. That Saturday started like the others. Coffee burned. Phone buzzed. A rush job popped up with a bonus tag attached, an address in a glass tower overlooking the river. I accepted before the app could blink. A clogged line, the description said, bathroom sink backing up intermittently. Easy enough. I loaded my bag, checked the wrench teeth, wiped grease off my forearm, and told myself this one job would cover the florist's last invoice. The building rose clean and quiet, the kind of place where the lobby smells like citrus and the security desk has nothing to secure. The elevator slid upward without a sound. I watched the floor numbers climb and felt that odd mix of pride and envy I always did in expensive buildings. People lived like this while I chased drips for deposits. It did not bother me. I had a plan. We had a date. The door opened after a brief knock. A man about my age stood there barefoot, casual, smiling in a way that suggested he had not rushed to meet anyone all morning. He wore a soft shirt and carried a phone loosely, thumb hovering like he was mid-text. I introduced myself, gave the practiced line about the sink, and stepped inside. The apartment stretched wide and pale. Sunlight poured across stone counters. Somewhere water ran, a steady hiss like a confession you could not turn off. I set my bag down near the entry and followed the sound toward the hallway. That was when movement caught my eye. Serena walked past the doorway with her hair damp, wrapped in a towel that stopped mid-thigh. She was moving fast, like someone crossing a hotel room to grab a forgotten charger. Our eyes met, and time did that stupid thing where it pretends to stop. Her face went empty first, then sharp with alarm. She pivoted and ran, bare feet slapping tile, and the bathroom door slammed hard enough to echo. I did not process it all at once. My body moved before my brain caught up. I went after her, my bag half lifted, the wrench clattering back into place. I reached the bathroom door and tried the handle. Locked. I said her name without thinking, not loud, not soft, just a reflex that felt like checking a pulse. Behind me, the man spoke, his voice light but edged. He sounded amused until he did not. He asked, "What the hell? Do you know my girlfriend?" The words landed wrong. They hit in a place that had not existed a second earlier. I turned around and saw him standing at the end of the hall, arms folded loosely now, eyes narrowed with curiosity more than anger. He was not bracing for a fight. He was bracing for an explanation. I told him my name. I said I was here to fix a sink. I said the woman in the bathroom was my fiancée. I said it slowly, each word a step across thin ice. He laughed once, short and disbelieving, then stopped. The running water did not stop. Serena did not come out. We moved into the living area without agreeing to it. He leaned against the counter like he had done it 100 times. I stood near the hall because that felt closer to her, closer to something I could still influence. He said his name was Logan. He said Serena lived here. He said she had moved in a few months back, that the lease was almost done. He said she hated plumbing noises and always told him to call someone. I asked him how long they had been together. He answered without hesitation. The timeline scraped against my own like metal on metal. Months overlapped. Days aligned in ways that felt planned. He asked me where Serena lived. I gave the address of our place and felt foolish the moment it left my mouth. He frowned, not angry yet, just confused. I knocked on the bathroom door again. I asked Serena to open it. I asked her to talk. I did not raise my voice because raising it would have meant I already knew what this was. The lock stayed firm. The water kept running. Logan checked his phone and showed me a photo without flourish. Serena at the river, smiling. The same jacket I bought her last winter draped over her shoulders. I recognized the seam on the pocket where I had stitched it back together. He said the picture was from last week. I said she had told me she was visiting her sister that weekend. We stared at each other like two people realizing they had been reading the same book with different covers. A neighbor knocked because of the noise. The running water had finally crossed a line. Logan explained something about a plumbing issue and waved the neighbor away with practiced calm. The neighbor nodded and left, uninterested in anything that did not involve his own unit. Privacy returned like a curtain dropping. I called Serena's phone. It rang once, twice, then stopped. She did not answer. Logan tried his own call and got the same result. We stood there with two silent phones and a locked door between us. I thought about work, about the app timer ticking somewhere invisible, about the fact that I was still technically on the clock. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. I put my hand on the bathroom door and felt the vibration of water through the frame. I pictured the sink filling, imagined a flood because nobody wanted to face what had already spilled. Logan went to shut off the valve under the sink. He knelt, efficient, not panicking. He had lived here long enough to know where everything was. The water stopped. The apartment grew quiet in a way that made every breath loud. He stood and said we needed to get her out of there. He said it with concern that felt genuine. He was not gloating. He was not threatening. He looked like someone who had just realized the ground under his feet had been rearranged. I told him I would not leave. He nodded, like that was obvious. He knocked on the door and said her name in a tone meant to calm. He said there were neighbors and a mess, and this could not stay frozen. The lock clicked. The door opened a few inches. Serena stood there, wrapped tighter now, eyes red, hair dripping onto the tile. She did not look at me. She did not look at Logan. She stared at the floor like it might offer instructions. She stepped out and tried to speak. Words came out that did not line up with the room. She said there was a misunderstanding. She said stress made people act strangely. She said she could explain if we would just stop looking at her like that. I listened for something solid and did not hear it. Logan asked her to tell him who I was. She said my name and said I was someone she had been seeing before. She said it the way people say a sentence they have rehearsed while brushing their teeth. I corrected her without raising my voice. I said we were engaged. I said the date. I said the venue. I said the deposits. The color drained from her face in stages. She tried to pivot toward me then, like a plant following light. She said we should talk privately. Logan stepped between us without touching either of us. He said no. He said not today. The police arrived because the neighbor had called again, this time about raised voices. 2 officers stood in the living room and asked simple questions. Nobody wanted paperwork. Nobody wanted a scene. Serena wrapped herself in a robe Logan handed her. I gave my ID and explained why I was there. The officers looked at the sink, looked at the app on my phone, looked at the locked door again, and told us to keep it down. They left with the same neutrality they arrived with. When the door closed behind them, the apartment felt smaller. Serena finally looked at me. The look asked for time without saying it. I did not grant it. I picked up my bag. I told Logan I would cancel the job in the app because I could not finish it. He nodded and said he would take care of it. I stepped into the hall and felt the air shift, like crossing from one climate to another. The elevator ride down took longer than the ride up. Every floor felt like a question mark. By the time the doors opened at the lobby, I understood that whatever Serena had been doing, it had not been an accident. It had required calendars and lies and a belief that the walls between lives were thicker than they were. Outside, the river moved the way it always had. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel until my hands stopped shaking. I did not cry. I did not shout. I opened the app and marked the job incomplete with a note that did not explain anything. Then I drove home with the radio off and the future rearranging itself mile by mile. I did not drive home right away. Muscle memory wanted me to, but habit can betray you when the address you trust has been compromised. I parked 2 blocks from the apartment and sat there long enough for the adrenaline to thin into something colder. My phone buzzed with a missed call from Serena, then another, then a text that said she could explain everything if we just talked. I did not answer. I needed facts before voices. Voices bend things. I opened our shared budgeting app first. It felt procedural, which helped. Numbers do not raise their hands or lock themselves in bathrooms. The wedding category showed gaps where there should not have been any. The caterer's second payment was marked pending, not completed. The venue deposit showed a partial refund request initiated 3 days earlier. I scrolled. The florist invoice was marked canceled with a note I did not recognize. I checked dates and times. The requests lined up with nights Serena had told me she was working late or visiting family. I called the venue and kept my tone neutral. They confirmed the request came from Serena's email and that it included a note about rescheduling due to personal reasons. They had held the date, but warned that holds expire. I thanked them and wrote it all down. Not for revenge. For clarity. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. I let it ring until voicemail kicked in. The message was calm, male, and careful. Logan said he thought it was fair to talk. He said there were details that did not make sense to him either. He said he would send screenshots if I wanted them. I told him to send everything. The screenshots arrived in a neat cluster. Messages about rent and utilities. Messages about furniture purchases. Messages about weekend trips that overlapped exactly with weekend Serena said she had been at conferences. There were photos too, nothing graphic, just domestic. A mug I had never seen. A plant I had never watered. Serena smiling into a kitchen that was not ours. Each image landed with a dull thud, not sharp anymore. The shock had already spent itself. I called Logan. We spoke like people negotiating a truce neither of us had asked for. He said Serena had told him she rented the place alone at first, then later said she needed help because her hours were unstable. He said he had paid the deposit and the first month. He said she talked about moving abroad eventually, starting fresh, no attachments. He laughed once when he said it, then apologized. I told him about the wedding date. I told him about the deposits. I told him she had pushed for a smaller ceremony because she wanted to save money, a line that made sense until it did not. Logan went quiet long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted. He said she had shown him a ring and said it belonged to her grandmother, a placeholder until she could buy something better. I closed my eyes and pictured the ring in my sock drawer. Serena called again. I answered this time because avoidance had finished its job. She launched into explanation without waiting. She said she had been overwhelmed. She said the wedding pressure had made her feel invisible. She said Logan was a mistake that got out of hand. She said she never meant for me to find out like this. I asked her a simple question and waited. When did you plan to tell me? Silence stretches differently over a phone line. She filled it with a story about timing and fear and wanting to protect me. I asked another question. Why cancel the deposits? She said she needed flexibility. She said things were uncertain. I told her I knew about the lease. I told her I had spoken to Logan. The line went dead. She hung up or lost service. It did not matter which. I drove home, then because there was no reason not to. The apartment looked the same from the outside, which felt like a lie. Inside, I noticed things I had never cataloged before. The closet door not fully closing. A new suitcase tucked behind winter coats. A drawer in the kitchen that stuck because it was overstuffed. I opened it and found a folder with printed confirmations, addresses highlighted, dates circled. Not ours. I did not tear anything. I did not throw anything. I photographed and filed. I packed my essentials into a bag and moved them to the spare room. I texted Serena that we would talk later and that I needed space tonight. She replied with a promise to come home and explain in person. I replied with a request that she not. She sent a message about love. I did not respond. Logan called again later that evening. He said Serena had come back to the apartment and tried to convince him the situation could be salvaged if they presented a united front. He said she had accused me of manipulation, of controlling money, of creating pressure she could not breathe under. He said it did not work. He said he asked her to leave for the night. She showed up at our place anyway. I heard her keys in the lock and stepped into the hall before the door could open. I told her through the door that tonight was not the night. She said she had nowhere else to go. I said she did. She accused me of cruelty. I said we would talk with witnesses later. The door stayed closed. I slept lightly and woke early. My phone showed a string of messages from Serena sent after midnight. They moved from apology to anger to bargaining. I did not reply. Instead, I called the bank and asked about account permissions. The representative explained options in a calm voice. I changed what I could without drama. I froze what needed freezing. I did it by the book. By mid-morning, Logan texted that Serena had come back again and that he had asked for documentation for the money he had spent. She had said there were misunderstandings and that paperwork would complicate things. He said that answer settled something for him. We met later that day in a public place that did not invite spectacle. He brought copies. I brought copies. The timelines overlapped so precisely that there was no room left for interpretation. Serena had not been torn between two lives. She had been curating them, selecting what to show and when, confident the walls would hold. The mind-bending moment came not from what she had done, but from what she had planned next. A printed email confirmation for a one-way flight sat in the folder, dated weeks out, destination circled. Another address. Another start. She had not been choosing between us. She had been lining up exits. Logan stared at the paper and laughed without humor. He said he felt like an investor reading a prospectus after the company dissolved. I felt like a homeowner discovering a second mortgage I never signed. Serena called while we were still sitting there. I let it ring. Logan did not. He put it on speaker and asked her directly about the flight. The pause was long enough to count. She said plans change. He said lies end. We stood and left without ceremony. Outside, the day carried on. People walked dogs. Cars idled at lights. The world did not register that two men had just stepped out of a carefully constructed fiction. I drove home with a list in my head and a sense that the worst of the surprise was over, replaced by something heavier. The realization that the wedding had been dismantled quietly, piece by piece, while I fixed pipes to pay for it. The morning after the meeting, momentum took over. I stopped thinking in scenes and started thinking in steps. There was no drama to chase and no speech to prepare. There was a structure to dismantle, and it required attention more than emotion. I began with the vendors because that was where Serena had done her quietest damage. I called each one, verified dates, confirmed payment methods, and requested written summaries. The pattern was consistent. She had not canceled everything. She had softened commitments just enough to keep them reversible. It was not hesitation. It was positioning. When the venue asked who would be responsible for final decisions, I gave my name and asked for dual confirmation on any change going forward. They agreed and sent the confirmation in writing. By noon, my phone lit up with a different kind of message. Serena's manager emailed asking to verify an employment reference. The request came through a general inquiry channel and included my number because Serena had listed me as an emergency contact and secondary reference months earlier. I responded with a simple clarification that I was no longer able to provide references and suggested they contact Serena directly. I did not add commentary. The silence that followed told me enough. Logan sent a message saying he had pulled bank statements. He attached summaries that showed transfers he had assumed were rent being redirected within days. He asked if I had noticed similar movements. I had. We compared notes and found the same clearing account appearing in both of our records, a place Serena had described differently to each of us. The account was not illegal. It was intentional. She had kept it just opaque enough to look harmless. I went to work because routine was still mine to control. On the site, my foreman asked if I was distracted. I said yes and finished the job anyway. While I was under a sink, my phone vibrated with a voicemail from Serena's mother asking to talk. I did not answer. Family conversations have a way of flattening truth into comfort. I wanted accuracy. The escalation arrived uninvited in the afternoon. Serena showed up at the site. She did not announce herself. She stepped into the taped-off area with the confidence of someone who believed rules bent for her. She said my name and reached for my arm. I stepped back and asked her to leave. She raised her voice and said she needed her things. She said I was holding her property. She said she would call someone if I did not cooperate. Witnesses matter. I asked a coworker to stay. I asked Serena to lower her voice. She said I was threatening her by refusing to talk. I told her the conversation needed to happen with a mediator present. She laughed and said I was trying to control the narrative. I told her to leave again. She left, but not quietly. An hour later, my supervisor pulled me aside and said a complaint had come in alleging harassment. The description did not match anything that had happened. It included phrases that sounded practiced. I asked for the timestamp and names. The timestamp overlapped with footage from the site cameras and statements from 2 coworkers. The supervisor nodded and said the matter would be documented and closed unless more appeared. He advised me to keep communication limited. I agreed. I drove home and found Serena's suitcase missing. The closet looked stripped in a way that suggested urgency rather than planning. The folder with the printed confirmations was gone. I checked the spare room and found my bag untouched. I photographed the space again. Documentation felt dull and relentless, which was exactly what it needed to be. Logan called in the evening and said Serena had tried a different angle with him. She had suggested he and I were coordinating against her. She had said she felt unsafe. He told her he would communicate only through email going forward and asked her to retrieve her belongings with a third party present. He forwarded her response. It accused him of abandonment and hinted at legal action without naming grounds. The mind-shifting moment came when an email from the airline landed in my inbox. It was not addressed to me. It was a forwarding error from a shared account Serena had forgotten to remove me from. The one-way ticket confirmation had been changed. The destination was the same. The date was earlier. She had moved it up. I called the airline and explained the mistake. They could not share details, but they confirmed a modification had occurred. I thanked them and hung up. I did not feel anger. I felt clarity. The window for confusion had closed. Serena returned to the apartment that night with a friend I did not know. I stayed in the spare room and recorded the interaction on my phone without engaging. She demanded her remaining items. I told her she could take what was hers under observation. She accused me of surveillance. I pointed to the friend and said witnesses protect everyone. She took clothes and small items and left the furniture untouched. The friend avoided eye contact. The next morning, Logan sent a final package. It included a timeline he had assembled with dates, payments, and messages, all cross-referenced. He wrote that he was stepping back completely and would provide documentation if requested by anyone who needed it. He wrote that he wanted no further contact. I replied with thanks and said the same. The pressure shifted after that. Serena's messages stopped. Her mother called again, then texted asking for context. I responded with a brief statement that the wedding was canceled due to documented issues and that details would be shared through appropriate channels if necessary. The text did not argue. It asked for copies. I said I would send summaries. By the end of the week, Serena attempted one last move. She filed a request through a community mediation service claiming property dispute and emotional distress. The mediator contacted me and asked for my account. I sent dates, times, and attachments. The mediator responded with a neutral acknowledgement and said the case would not proceed without corroboration. There was none. The apartment felt quieter than it ever had. I cooked meals I did not rush. I slept through the night. I canceled my weekend Taskrabbit availability because I no longer needed to chase deposits that were not happening. I kept going to work. I kept answering emails. I kept my tone flat and factual. On Friday afternoon, Logan sent a short message. He said Serena had emailed him a goodbye that blamed circumstances and promised growth. He said he did not reply. He attached a final note from his bank confirming the account closures on his end. The structure she had leaned on collapsed because the supports were removed, not because anyone pushed. As the week closed, the reality settled in. The wedding had not ended in a scene. It had ended in spreadsheets, timestamps, and doors that stayed closed. The worst surprises were over. What remained was consequence, slow and unavoidable, moving toward her with the same certainty that had carried me from that elevator down to the street. The fallout did not arrive all at once. It came in increments, like notices slipping under a door. Each one carried weight, not because it was dramatic, but because it was final. The venue confirmed the cancellation in writing the following Monday. The hold expired without renewal. The florist released the date to another couple within hours. The caterer refunded what remained after administrative fees. The numbers settled into a ledger that no longer required my weekends to sustain it. I closed the wedding folder and archived the emails. The act felt administrative, not emotional, which told me the decision had already finished happening somewhere deeper. Serena's family reached out again, this time with a different tone. Her mother asked for a meeting. Her father asked for documentation. I provided a summary with attachments and dates. There were no accusations in my response and no commentary about character. I sent facts. 2 days later, her father replied with a brief acknowledgement and no follow-up questions. That silence carried its own verdict. The mediation request expired quietly. No hearing. No next steps. The mediator sent a closing note stating the case lacked mutual participation. I printed it and filed it away. Not as a trophy, as a record. Logan kept his distance as promised. He forwarded one last message from Serena that attempted to reframe everything as mutual misunderstanding. He did not respond. I did not either. When someone is used to exits, the absence of one is the only language that lands. At work, the harassment complaint was formally closed. Human Resources sent a neutral email confirming no action would be taken. My supervisor pulled me aside and told me to take the rest of the afternoon off if I needed it. I declined and finished the shift. Routine mattered more than relief. Serena tried to retrieve the ring through a third party. The message said it belonged to her family. I responded with a request for proof of ownership. None arrived. I boxed it and stored it with the rest of the wedding items. Some objects do not need decisions immediately. They wait. The apartment changed slowly. I moved furniture not to reclaim space, but to rebalance it. I canceled subscriptions I had never chosen. I updated emergency contacts. I replaced a cracked light switch she had always said she would fix. The changes were small and cumulative, like turning a dial until the noise drops out. The financial consequences reached Serena next. The clearing account Logan identified was flagged by his bank due to unusual movement after he closed his side. Serena's access was not revoked, but questions were asked. She emailed me once, asking if I had spoken to anyone. I replied that I had spoken only where required and provided only documentation. She did not write again. Her lease with Logan ended early under a termination clause he exercised with cause. She moved out within a week. Where she went afterward did not concern me until her mother asked if I knew. I said no and meant it. A month passed, then another. Life did not rush to replace what had been removed. It settled into something steadier. I stopped scanning rooms for absence. I stopped checking my phone for explanations that would never add up. The final consequence arrived without warning and without me in the room. Serena's employer conducted an internal review after discrepancies surfaced in reimbursement claims tied to travel dates that no longer matched records. I learned this secondhand when her mother called and asked if I had ever noticed Serena struggling at work. I said I had noticed pressure, not misconduct. The call ended shortly after. I did not ask questions. I sold the ring quietly through a reputable buyer. I did not negotiate sentiment. The funds went into savings. Not for celebration. For margin. Logan and I crossed paths once, months later, outside a hardware store. We nodded. He said he had moved apartments. I said I had stopped weekend plumbing jobs. Neither of us lingered. Some chapters closed without needing summaries. The last message from Serena came late one night and contained no requests. It acknowledged damage without naming it. It spoke about growth in abstract terms. I did not reply. Growth does not require an audience. By the end of the year, the story no longer felt like mine to carry. The events stayed where they belonged, documented and concluded. Serena lost stability because stability requires consistency. Logan lost money but kept distance. I lost a future that had been constructed without my consent and gained one that required less explanation. The truth did not explode. It accumulated. And when it was heavy enough, it reshaped everything it touched.